There is an almost invisible moment when someone's thought shifts from occasional to constant. When a man can no longer get you out of his mind, he begins to act in ways that may seem subtle at first glance, but deep down reveal a profound movement within his inner world. Inspired by the concepts of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, we will explore how the male unconscious reacts to a connection that becomes inescapable, how he projects, how the shadow is activated, and how the desire for integration drives him to act. You are about to dive into a rare, intimate, and deeply symbolic perspective on the behavior of a man touched by a psychic bond that transcends the ordinary. Get ready to understand the silent signs and revealing gestures that show when you occupy not only his thoughts, but the emotional center of his psyche. Comment below. I allow conscious love to find me. When a man cannot stop thinking about someone, this phenomenon goes far beyond simple attraction. From Carl Jung's perspective, it is deeply tied to unconscious processes involving projection, the shadow, and the quest for psychic integration. The male mind, just like the female, carries within its unconscious the image of the archetype of the other. In men's case, this image is known as the Animma, the inner representation of the feminine principle. When he meets someone who resonates with this archetype, his psyche may respond intensely, triggering recurring thoughts, idealizations, and even a sense of destiny or inexplicable connection. Jung explains that projection is the act of attributing unrecognized inner qualities to another. When a man projects his anima onto a woman, he is not only connecting with her, but also with hidden aspects of himself. This activates the process of individuation, the journey towards psychic wholeness. In this context, obsessive thinking is an inner call to transformation, an impulse from the unconscious to integrate the undeveloped aspects of the soul. The shadow is also activated. The emotional intensity of constantly thinking about someone can bring to the surface insecurities, fears, and repressed desires. All this forms a symbolic field of tension that pushes him to act differently, whether through approach, introspection, or even contradictory behaviors. The repetition of thought reflects the psyche's inner movement in search of balance, and understanding this process is key to recognizing what lies beyond the visible, the unconscious working silently to unite opposites and spark evolution. When a man cannot stop thinking about someone, he often doesn't realize that something much deeper is being activated within him, the archetype of the Animma. According to Carl Jung, the Animma is the feminine aspect present in every man's unconscious. She represents his sensitivity, intuition, creativity, empathy, and also his ability to love. When a man encounters a woman who resonates with this inner image, he is not only drawn to her, but is also recognizing in her a forgotten part of himself. The Anima's activation happens when certain traits of the woman, her voice, her gaze, her presence, or even her absence, touch unconscious areas and awaken emotions he cannot name. This experience may feel magical, intense, or even confusing. His constant thoughts are not only about the woman herself, but about what she represents to his psyche, a call to reconnect with his own inner feminine. This process is involuntary. The Animma, as an archetype, does not need permission to manifest. She acts through symbols, dreams, intuitions, and often through a mental obsession that is difficult to rationalize. When a man finds himself repeatedly thinking of someone, he may be facing an inner reflection that has become external. The woman's image transforms into a mirror of something that needs to be retrieved within him, whether a repressed sensitivity, an unlived affection, or a tenderness forgotten under the hardness of life. This encounter is not superficial. Even if he tries to ignore or distract himself, the thought returns. The woman becomes the symbolic center of something his soul longs to integrate. Jung points out that the Animma can appear at different levels of development, from the seductive and destructive figure to the wise woman who mediates consciousness. The stage of this projection also determines how the man will react to the overwhelming feeling. If he is at a less developed stage, he may fall in love with an unreal image, expecting her to fill his voids or save his soul. This makes him vulnerable to frustrations and disappointments, since the real woman will never fully correspond to the archetypal image projected onto her. But if he is more self-aware, he may realize that what he feels is tied to a process of self-discovery. He then begins to use this feeling as a tool to look inward, When consciously recognized, the Animma becomes a bridge between the ego and the unconscious. She guides the man toward wholeness, encouraging him to open up emotionally, to express creativity, to listen to his intuition, and to embrace his feelings without fear. When a man thinks persistently about a woman, the intensity of that feeling may be the beginning of a new inner cycle, individuation, the path Jung described as the deepest process of personal transformation. It's important to understand that this movement is not romantic in the conventional sense. It is a symbolic call, which doesn't always imply a concrete love relationship. Often the woman who awakens this process may not even know what is happening or may have no direct connection to him. Still, her image remains alive in the man's mind precisely because it carries archetypal symbolic value that transcends objective reality. That's why, when he cannot stop thinking of her, it is because something within him has been activated. It is not a rational choice, but a call from the soul. The Animma calls him not only to desire her, but to rediscover what he has lost within himself. And if embraced consciously, this reunion can profoundly transform his relationship with the world, with love, and above all with his own masculine identity. When a man finds himself mentally imprisoned by the image of a woman, he often doesn't realize that what he loves in her may not be her as she is, but the projection he has created. Carl Jung explained that projection is a fundamental psychic mechanism by which a person transfers their unconscious contents onto another. In relationships, this is especially powerful because what is unknown in oneself is more easily perceived outside, in the other. Thus, insistent thinking may be less about true love and more about unconscious fascination with a repressed part of his own soul. Projection happens automatically and silently. A man sees in the woman qualities he believes are hers, beauty, mystery, depth, sweetness, but which in fact are his own psychic contents, placed on her like in a mirror. She becomes the vessel of what he does not recognize or has not yet developed within himself. This explains why he may often find himself obsessed with someone he barely knows, or someone who, objectively, makes no sense in his life. The magnetism lies less in external reality and more in what she symbolizes internally. Idealization is born directly from this projection. The woman becomes the savior, the answer to his existential void, the object of a search often begun in childhood, when the unconscious started to build images of the feminine from maternal figures, emotional experiences, and cultural influences. When she fits this symbolic mold, he unconsciously places her on a pedestal, becoming blind to her imperfections and real humanity. At this point, his fixed thoughts are fueled by a distorted image, created not to see the other but to keep an unconscious fantasy alive. This dynamic, however illusory it may seem, fulfills an important psychological function. Projection reveals what lies latent within the man. What he sees in the woman is largely what he is seeking within himself. If he sees her as sensitive, it is because his own sensitivity is crying out for recognition. If he perceives her as wise, perhaps it is his intuition that longs to emerge. Every detail he admires in her is at the same time a call for his own psychic development. The woman becomes the symbol of an inner process that demands expression. Yet projection also brings risks. If the man does not awaken to this unconscious movement, he may remain trapped in illusory relationships or unattainable fantasies, projecting the ideal where only the real exists. When confronted with the woman's true personality, he may feel disappointed, betrayed, or confused. The projection then breaks, revealing the gap between the idealized image and the concrete person. This moment, though painful, is essential for growth. It is the opportunity to withdraw the energy from projection and reintegrate it into his own consciousness. Jung maintained that the end of projection marks the beginning of true love. Only when the other is seen as they are, with light and shadow, virtues and flaws, can love be conscious. Before that, what exists is an enchantment with one's own soul reflected in the other's mirror. That is why constant thoughts of someone can be seen as a transitional phase between ignorance and awareness, between idealization and a genuine encounter. When a man realizes he is projecting, he can begin to reclaim that energy. Instead of remaining trapped by the woman's image, he begins to investigate what fascinates him about her. and what it reveals about himself. This inward movement transforms obsession into self-knowledge. He stops simply desiring the other and begins to desire an encounter with the deeper parts of himself. Projection is therefore a bridge. At first, it seems to take him away from reality, but if crossed with courage and clarity, it leads to the recognition of who he truly is. And that recognition is the first step toward mature love, the kind born not from lack but from wholeness. When a man cannot stop thinking of a woman, perhaps he is just beginning to walk the path back to himself. When a man is overtaken by constant thoughts of a woman, what often dominates him is not just desire, but the inner conflict that this desire provokes. Carl Jung called the shadow everything repressed, denied, or unrecognized in a person's conscious personality. It represents aspects deemed unacceptable or undesirable, but which remain alive in the unconscious, waiting for a chance to emerge. When desire becomes uncontrollable, it acts as a channel through which shadow contents come to the surface, generating ambivalence, fear, fascination, and even guilt. Obsession with someone may be the visible face of a deeper conflict. The woman who fills his thoughts is not merely an external presence. She also symbolizes the part of the psyche that defies control, that breaks rigid ego structures and confronts the man with everything he tried to suppress. Desire then ceases to be just an affective or erotic impulse. It becomes an internal battlefield between what he believes he should feel and what he actually feels. This struggle can be silent and devastating. The man may find himself torn between the urge to approach and the fear of losing control. The woman becomes, at this point, a mirror of his own shadow. She activates in him everything he does not want to see: his vulnerability, jealousy, insecurity, emotional dependence. Each recurring thought may be loaded with shame or pride, anger or idealization. The rational mind tries to explain, justify, or ignore it, but the truth is that the shadow does not remain silent. It cries out for recognition through images and emotions. Jung teaches us that the shadow is not something to be eliminated, but integrated. Ignoring it only intensifies its power. When a man tries to repress his obsessive feelings, he may end up distancing himself from his authenticity. On the other hand, when he begins to explore why this woman stirs such intense emotions, he starts a process of reintegrating his own psyche. He begins to understand that this uncontrollable desire does not point only to her as an individual, but to a dimension of himself that needs to be embraced. The part that longs to love freely, to be seen, touched, and understood without masks. Many men have been conditioned from an early age to maintain composure, to control their feelings, to suppress sensitivity. When they find themselves deeply affected by a woman, they clash with the self-image they built. The shadow, in this context, includes everything that was rejected in the name of strength, control, or independence. The woman who becomes the object of fascination may unknowingly be breaking down these inner defenses, causing the collapse of the idealized ego. That's why constant thoughts of her also carry anguish, insecurity, and instability, because they shake the most fragile and repressed core of masculine identity. This is a decisive moment. Either the man dives into his shadow and begins to integrate its contents, or he becomes lost in it, projecting his fears and desires into compulsive behaviors, excessive jealousy, suffocating idealizations, or even defensive withdrawal. Integrating the shadow means recognizing that desire is legitimate, but can only be lived in a healthy way when it does not dominate consciousness. It is necessary to look at the roots of that desire, at what it is trying to communicate, at the emptiness that sustains it, and at the traumas that intensify it. By doing this inner work, the man begins to free himself. The woman may still be present in his thoughts, but now with a different quality, no longer as obsession but as a symbol of a healing process. He realizes that desire is not an enemy, but a guide. That conflict is not weakness, but an invitation to self-knowledge, and that the shadow, when embraced, ceases to be a threat and becomes an ally. Thus, the uncontrollable thought of someone reveals not only the depth of the emotional bond, but above all, the degree of separation that exists between the man and his own soul. The greater the obsession, the greater the potential for transformation. The woman ceases to be just an object of desire and becomes the archetype leading him back to himself. When a man is deeply affected by someone to the point of not being able to stop thinking about her, there is something beyond desire or idealization. It is an unconscious drive toward integration. In Jungian terms, this drive is part of the individuation process, the psyche's journey toward wholeness. What happens in this state of mental fascination is not only an attempt to approach the other, but to reconnect with essential parts of himself that were forgotten, repressed, or never developed. This inner call manifests through behaviors that are often instinctive, unexpected, or intensely symbolic. The unconscious does not act by logic, but by necessity. When it perceives an opportunity for psychic development through the figure of a woman, it activates deep mechanisms that push the man toward that experience. The frequency with which she appears in his thoughts, the way he interprets her words, the emotional intensity he feels at the slightest sign of her presence or absence, all these are expressions of that archetypal force seeking manifestation. It is not simple liking, it is a summons to cross the mirror. These unconscious impulses often escape reason. He may seek closeness in seemingly casual ways, trying to stay in contact, creating pretexts, starting conversations, giving subtle compliments, or paying attention to small details that show presence and care. In other cases, he may withdraw completely, fearful of what he feels, acting cold or distant, even while his inner world is in turmoil. Both behaviors, cautious approach or protective distancing, reveal that something deeper is moving. The ego, trying to maintain control, reacts ambivalently to what it does not fully understand. The drive for integration also manifests through a silent search for authentic emotional connection. The man begins to observe himself more, to reflect on who he is, what he feels, and why he feels it. He may be led to review old beliefs about love, masculinity, intimacy, and control. This happens because the feminine figure who affects him symbolically represents a bridge between what he is and what he can become. She awakens in him the desire for depth, not only in the relationship, but within himself. Over time, this impulse begins to guide the man toward more conscious attitudes. He becomes more vulnerable, more honest in his expressions, more receptive to what he feels. Even if he resists it, the psyche does not retreat. The unconscious will continue to present images, dreams, emotions, and signs, all with the purpose of leading him to integrate what he has projected onto the other. He is called to recognize that what he sees in her also lives in some way within himself, and that recognition shifts his posture, his intentions, and his gestures. Behaviors like writing deep messages, showing concern, trying to understand her emotions, or wanting to know more about her feelings are clear signs that he is not only interested, he is being transformed. This movement is revealing. The man who once avoided his own feelings now sees them reflected in the figure of the other. The woman is no longer just someone he wants to conquer. She represents a crossing, a symbolic rite of passage. To reach her emotionally, he must first access his own soul. The unconscious acts, therefore, as the architect of this process. Every gesture, every choice, every silence or spoken word carries deeper meaning. The man who cannot get her out of his mind is being pushed to evolve. And this evolution happens not only because he wants to be with her, but because she symbolizes what is missing for him to become whole. The relationship he longs to build externally reflects the relationship he needs to build internally, with his emotions, his affections, and his psychic contents. When this man begins to realize that his thoughts are an expression of something greater, a call to integrate his inner feminine, to embrace his shadow, to mature emotionally, he ceases to be a prisoner of the feeling and becomes the protagonist of his own transformation. At that point, love is no longer just a search for the other, but also a reunion with himself, and that is perhaps the deepest way to love, when desire for another leads us to recognize ourselves fully. Constantly thinking about someone may seem at first glance like a simple whim of the heart. But from a Jungian perspective, this obsessive thought reveals much deeper layers of the male soul. Behind the image that won't leave the mind lies the unconscious call for self-knowledge, for reclaiming sensitivity, for confronting the shadow, and for integrating the inner feminine. The woman who holds this symbolic place is not just an external desire. She is a mirror of what the male psyche longs to recognize, love, and transform. When a man begins to realize that his feelings are not weaknesses, but messages from the depths of himself, he begins a rare and courageous journey toward individuation. The woman may be the starting point, but the destination is much broader, the reunion with his own wholeness. If this content touched something within you, don't let this experience pass in silence. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and dive even deeper into the mysteries of the soul. And now click on the video appearing on the screen. It is the natural continuation of this reflection and can open even more doors within you. Your transformation begins now.